As some of you probably know, because some of you are there this week, we've got residency running this week and next week. Residency seems to be running all the time lately, so that's probably a good thing as we grow our student body and more of you join us. As Kathy mentioned, I did create the 10 strategic points, and I created it because I had some of the learners from the first cohort, and they were having a hard time figuring out how to structure their research. And at that time, we would have students in continuation 3 that didn't have an approved proposal yet, a lot of them. So we did it so that you would all be able to just quickly structure your research, or at least do it much quicker than in the past. So now we're getting into kind of detailing some of those points, even in more detail than in the past. And one of the first points in the 10 strategic points is to be able to define and justify the need for your study, and then use that need to define your problem statement. So that's why we put this first presentation together, to give you 5 different ways to define the need for your research, because many of you have probably heard the way to define the need for your research is to go find 3 or 4 articles, read the end of the article, see what it says, and use that as the basis for defining your need for your study. Well, that is one of many ways for doing it. So what I'm going to do is cover 5 different ways that you can do it rather than just the one. And this presentation, I believe, is going to be on the DC network. So then if your chairs argue with you because you're here, they're not, and you actually are getting this message before any of the chairs are, because I haven't even covered it with the group of 20 chairs that I coach. So you're early, so you can carry the message to your peers, you can carry it to your chairs, you can send the chairs the link when it comes up to your cohort group here, and say, here's another PowerPoint presentation or something you should listen to because it came from the School of Doctoral Studies, and that's how we do things at GCU, because many of our faculty come from different universities. So you can not only benefit from learning this information, but we benefit from you as learners bringing the information back to the chairs. As we try to roll it out to 300 or 400 chairs, you can also roll it out to your peers and the chairs and everybody else. So that's kind of the context. I want to talk about first the background to the problem, and this section is generically how you are going to justify to the university, to your chair, to AQR review, and to IRB, justify doing your study. Because although your study may first come out of your head, your study ultimately has to come out of the literature, not out of your head. So that's kind of the purpose to this. So we say you need to go research a gap in the literature. And people will come back and say, okay, there have been no studies done on this topic. That's kind of a nice logical interpretation of what a gap is, but that's not what we mean by a gap. So we kind of use this new scholar term that says the gap is the difference between what is known in the field of research and what is not yet known, and in fact what still needs to be known. And that's why defining the gap comes from the literature from the past few years, and you're defining what the literature says needs to be researched, either directly or indirectly, and we'll talk about some different ways that you can do that. You don't just take it out of one article. You have to read the articles in that general area, and you have to synthesize that information, and we'll be talking about some different ways that you can synthesize that information to get to the gap that you want to take a look at. And although I may cover 5 of them from a model that I've recently created, I'm sure there are other ways that other people from journal articles have justified their study as well. We also then use that gap, that defined need, to develop our topic statement and our problem statement. So you're going to use it to define the topic and name your study, as well as to develop your specific problem statement. And I'll also go over some examples of doing this so you can see how it can be done. There are some specific steps that you can take that you're probably already taking. That is, you're all reading a lot of scholarly articles and scholarly books on your particular broad topic. If you're interested in looking at emotional intelligence and how it affects organizations, which is being researched in business, it's being researched in psychology, it's being researched in education, of course you're reading all the articles you can find on emotional intelligence and its influence on organizations. Then you also, as you begin to read the literature in your particular area, could be emotional intelligence. It could be the use of different technologies like gaming or virtual workplace. It could be studying high-performing organizations. Whatever it is, you're looking at that broad research with the intent to start looking, what are some of the problems that are being researched in the area? What are they looking at? If you look in the field of leadership that people have been studying for decades and still study, a major focus of research, if you look at the big broad category, is the relationship between leadership behaviors, practices, and styles. Is that related, and how does it influence the various organizational components? Employee satisfaction, organizational commitment, burnout, a whole bunch of things going on within the organization and the people in the organization, with the intent of that study to be looking at ultimately how do those factors such as organization commitment, satisfaction, lead to things that are performance-based, such as revenue increase or reduction in turnover or meeting whatever the organization's goals are. So the area is saying, what are leadership practices and behaviors? How does that influence the organization components? It could be climate, satisfaction, whatever is going on in the organization, but ultimately organizations care about that because they want to improve the performance of the organization. That's a broad topic. You may say, well, what I really care about is I care about resilient leaders because I have an interest in that topic of resilient leaders, which means maybe you're interested in looking at resilient leaders and how they influence even the resiliency in their own organization or the climate in their organization. So that's a subtopic. It's still broad, but it's within this big broad area of research. So you start to narrow it down. And as you're narrowing it down, you also begin to narrow down your literature. You're going to start focusing that area of resiliency and whatever the organization components you're looking at. If you're in education, in the business environment, or in psychology, or in the education, the EDD program, you might be interested in the broad area of using different technologies to influence learning or to influence cognitive dimensions like creativity. So that's a very broad area. In the past, it may have been looking at like the use of internet. But nowadays, it tends to be getting a little bit sexier in terms of looking at different forms of games. How do games influence the ability to learn or to perform? And now with the recent announcement about a month ago of virtual reality and the ability to do it even on your Samsung phone with the new virtual reality headsets. So virtual reality is now a reality at a fairly low cost. There's going to be a whole bunch of research on games versus virtual reality, on the use of virtual reality to improve communications in groups, because you can create social media groups on your telephone using virtual reality technology. So that whole broad use of innovative technologies for learning and communications, which is one of the focal areas in the PhD program, it's a big broad area. The technologies are changing, so based on the technologies you might be interested in, you could research that. So you continue to refine the review of the literature into whatever that real broad area is, technology influencing learning communications, down to specific technologies, specific type of learning, such as how could games influence the teaching in the area of STEM and science and math education. We now have some private schools and some public schools that are now saying our whole curriculum is game-based. Everything the students learn have some form of game involved in it because of the success of games, not only in teaching knowledge, but more importantly in terms of creating higher levels of creativity and certain higher levels of cognitive reasoning. So then in terms of getting to the background to the problem, the way you do it is you actually present the literature on that narrowed down topic that you're looking at. And you do it in a few set of steps. When you get into the background to the problem section, particularly in the proposal, it will tell you they want to see a historical review of the literature on the problem you're studying. Historical means they want to see it in the sense of time. And I tell people the easiest way to think about that is, on your broad, narrowed down problem, go and find the literature. When did the research first start on the use of technologies for learning and communications? Or when did the literature first start on studying a particular emotional intelligence and its influence on climate? Summarize those articles. Then what you end up with is what's the most recent literature. What's the literature from the past 2 or 3 years? Because it is that recent literature, not the old literature, that you use to justify your study. We don't go back 20 years ago to justify our study. We use the literature from the past 2 or 3 years to justify our study. So then that section ends with, here's all the current literature, here's what it's found, and here's what this literature says still needs to be researched. Or here's the trends in that research. Or here are some limitations and gaps in that research. Then what you do is you fill in the in-between. If you're looking at emotional intelligence, that might be a 30-year period that you're filling in. If you're looking at some of the older leadership models like servant leadership, it might be a 40 or 50-year period you're filling in. If you're looking at some of the things like virtual reality training, or now the use of the low-cost virtual reality technologies, that whole period from beginning to end might be 10 years. But the goal is to look at the beginning of the research on your problem, see how it evolved, get to the current research, and then use that current research to define the future. So that's what we mean by a historical overview. So you explore the original literature, then you explore how that research has evolved around your high-level problem, and then you describe it from the past 2 or 3 years, and then you use that to define your topic and your problem statement. And so here's an example. One of the themes going on in psychology and learning and even communications is that social intelligence is a model that's been evolving from the original research, which was the emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence originally came out of some of the IQ research and looking at other forms of intelligence. What's also going on in organizations is a lot of focus on engagement, the need to engage employees. It's not about satisfying them, but if they're fully engaged, they will become satisfied on their own. So we don't have to make them happy, we have to get them engaged. Another thing that's also going on is that social intelligence may provide the cognitive capabilities and actually influence that level of engagement. So you start saying, well, this about social intelligence, this about engagement, and you start putting those together by synthesizing what the literature is saying still needs to be done, and you end up with a problem statement such as, it is not known how social intelligence of leaders influence the level of engagement on teams and ultimately the level of performance of that team. So that's just about structuring some of these pieces of what they're saying needs to be researched. We need to know more about engagement. We need to know about the factors influencing engagement. Some of the research says there's some relationship there. And at the same time, there's a lot of research that says we need to improve the performance of organizations, because if organizations don't improve their performance every year, they ultimately die. So it becomes something that's important to society and to the people in organizations as well. And that's how you end up with that final problem statement. One of the other things you do is once you start using that literature, and one of the things you have to do in your prospectus and your proposal, you have to demonstrate that your literature that based on the literature, the research you say you want to do is meaningful. And we define in the prospectus template and the proposal template exactly what meaningful means. And we say you have to use the literature to identify why it's significant, why we should be solving the problem, why should we be looking at how gaming or virtual reality influences learning or improves communications in organizations. Then what you do, once the literature says we need to do this, you go through a three-step process. You say, okay, I'm going to collect this data. And then you say, when I collect this data, here's how it is going to address the defined need that you identified out of the literature. You're going to identify how it's going to contribute to the models and theories you're using for your dissertation. And then you're going to identify how it's making a significant contribution to the community, to the stakeholders, or to society. So significance in a university is, how do I go back and contribute to the literature? That's what a lot of research is about, is adding to that body of knowledge and understanding. You also are going to go back and say, I use these particular models and theories. I use the model and theory on social intelligence. I used a model and theory on engagement. Now I have to write up how my data is going to contribute and add value to those models. And then finally I have to add and talk about how my research will contribute to the real day-to-day life of people. So how might that data and information contribute to developing leaders to be more effective leaders? How does that data and information contribute to the organization so we get more engaged employees or more engaged students or more engaged participants in nonprofit organizations? And so you have to say, here was the need, here's what I'm going to collect, and here's what the meaning of what I'm going to collect. So you're going in kind of this round circle around research. What I've done, because in the past we said, go to the end of articles and find stated needs and use those and synthesize those to justify your study. Well, that's only one of many different ways to justify your study. So what I did was put together a model and say, a couple of things that we want to take a look at is, we tell people you need to synthesize this information, and there's different forms and levels of synthesis. We also say it is better to try to find a more innovative topic. So that's why you see those two dimensions, one across the top and one from bottom to top, where the degree of the innovation that comes out of this form of synthesis and analysis of the literature ends up being more innovative on the right, and it ends up needing more synthesis as you go from the bottom to the top. And I'm going to start with the center, with the recommendations. And this basically is, these are what we told you to do in the past. Look at the recommendations of research needed for the future that are shown at the end of articles. Not at the beginning, not what they study, but what they say needs to be further understood. And that can also include addressing weaknesses and limitations in their study. So one way to do it is to still go and find those 2 or 3 articles that say research is needed in these areas and put them together, or they reinforce each other. There's no magic answer how you synthesize it. You have to think through the process and come up with the arguments. So that's one way. If you go to an area which doesn't require a lot of synthesis, but it's also not going to give you a lot of innovation, we've talked before about the fact that you can replicate other studies. Replicating another study means you are using their problem statement, you are using their research questions and hypotheses, and you're using their data collection tools. Replicating means you are actually replicating the stuff. That is different than beginning to build on and extend the research. So when you build on and extend the research, the problem statement is a little different. You might still be looking at social intelligence and engagement, but what you're looking at about social intelligence, what you're looking at about engagement are different. The hypotheses are different. The instruments for collecting the data are different. The organizations in which you're going to do it is different. The justification for it is different. That's an extension. That's not a replication. Okay? So you kind of a little bit higher up than the pure replication is extension. If you're interested in doing replication type studies because they're quicker and faster to do, and one of the suggestions, if your goal in the doctoral program is to get in, get your dissertation, get your degree as quickly as possible, and you never plan to teach at a university or be a consultant in a particular area, then the quickest, cheapest, dirtiest way to get a dissertation done is to replicate it. And that is fair. And for those of us who originally as undergraduates were working in the hard sciences, trust me, the only form of dissertation you did was a replication, because to do hard science research, you need lots of money. And the only people who had the money were the professors, for me at MIT. They had millions and millions and millions of dollars. What they need is grunts to do more research. So by definition, you were generally doing replication, and they told you exactly what you were going to replicate. So in some, particularly the hard sciences, replication is needed. You can't come up with laws until you replicate and you repeat stuff over and over and over again. So replication is logical, legitimate research, and it can be much quicker to do. And if you've never gone on it, there is a site called Laird, L-A-E-R-D. It's www.laird.com. If you're doing a quantitative study and you want to learn what the statistical analysis is, why you do it, and step by step how to do it for your dissertation, from deciding upon your statistical analysis to deciding upon what assumptions you're going to test, how you're going to test them, how you're going to run the SPSS, and then how you're going to write up the section, that's what that website gives you. And it's $12.95 for a 6-month subscription. That's not per month. That's $12.95 or $2 a month. So it's a really nice, easy site to use. And my learners who have graduated, and I think I now have 10 that have done quantitative studies, those who didn't know about it wish they had, and those who now know about it are very happy that they had. So, and the nice thing, if you want to do a replication study, there's like 50 to 100 pages on there. How to justify a replication study, how to do a replication study, the 3 different forms of replication studies, including extensions. So, low end in terms of synthesis, low end in terms of innovation, but still a critical need within the social sciences and the hard sciences for future research. When you go up a little bit in terms of synthesis but not innovation, you have these broad area contributions. So I mentioned the one that there's a lot of research in psychology and education and even business on what is the relationship between leadership practices, organization characteristics, and organization performance. And so you can have in the leadership, you can have transformational leadership, you can have servant leadership, you can have emotional intelligence. You now start seeing things on authentic leadership, on resilient leadership, and all the different leaderships. In the center, you can have a satisfaction, commitment, engagement, flexibility of the organizations, lots of organization characteristics, and then you can measure performance in all different ways. Well, one way to contribute to that broad area is say, okay, there are new models of spiritual leadership coming out, some of which have a religious focus and some of which do not have a religious focus. So you can say, okay, I'm going to contribute to this broad area by looking at some of the new leadership models and begin the study once again. What is the relationship of spiritual leadership to employee engagement and ultimately maybe to the balanced scorecard results in that organization? That's a contribution, and you don't go into individual articles to find that you have to contribute to a broad area of research. You have to be able to say there's a broad area of research where leadership practices influencing organization characteristics results in organization results, and I'm going to look at a new model. Okay? So that's another way to justify it. The one on the bottom right is called reframing the problem. We as human beings, in almost every single situation, when we look at something, we state it as a problem, and we state it as the negative. Such as, we have a number of studies within the university of how minority groups, or how black males, or how black females, or how Hispanics, why do they drop out of college? That's what I call as a negative statement of the problem. However, if you put on your problem statement head, and if you were an expert in problem solving, you would learn that it's important to reframe problems into opportunities, including for research. So you may want to reframe it to is, what enables certain minorities, whatever the group is you're studying, to successfully complete college? Now, which is likely to give you the more valuable information? What's going to contribute to society? The second one, the reframing. So reframing negative problem statements into the positive solution statements gives you a much more innovative topic. Brenda Coombs, who's one of the learners that I had, who was in my first cohort group, had actually been homeless for 15 years. And so she came to the university, she got a bachelor's or master's, and she was working on her doctorate. And she wanted to go back, because she already works and contributes to the homeless community, to understand what caused and led to homelessness, particularly of women, because it's been increasing. And we said, well, why don't you reframe that? Because there are loads and loads of studies on the different factors that lead to it. I said, go check. See if there are any studies on what enables women to overcome homelessness. The number of studies? 0. Hundreds and hundreds of studies of what contributes to problems, but no study on what enables people to overcome it. So she went and did a study on how women can overcome homelessness and become a significant contributor to society. And she interviewed a number of women who had gone through that type of transition. So it ended up with her being on some TV programs, it ended with her being invited to some federal government meetings. There was some significant positive consequences of being a thought leader. So reframing is one of the best ways to get a more innovative topic. The top right-hand one is what you see more experienced researchers tend to do, and that is they meld topics from different areas to create a whole brand new topic. And as you know, we use Zoom for your chairs, when you get a chair, to coach the doctoral learners and provide coaching and mentoring via Zoom. And so Dr. Berman and myself and Kathy Ames decided we wanted to do a research project on Zoom and how chairs are using Zoom for coaching doctoral learners. And rather than just looking at learning, because we wanted, for some of us who teach in the PhD program in psych, we wanted to publish some articles that were going to look at it from a psychological perspective. So we actually went and took a look at the literature, and we combined a whole bunch of different threads. There is a whole thread in doctoral programs of, we need to increase the retention of our doctoral learners. When I went to a doctoral program, the goal was not to graduate more than 20 or 25%. And so we only graduated the top 20 or 25% because it was considered status, and that was the nature of doctoral programs. Nowadays, the nature of doctoral programs is we want to increase the graduation rate because we provide learners who can contribute to society. Okay. So that was a thread. Another thread was the whole use of technology, such as video technology, to improve the effectiveness of doctoral programs because of the increase of online. So we took that thread. The other one in doctoral programs is there is a feeling of social isolation that leads to people leaving the doctoral program. There's the whole other thread that if you improve social presence or the transactional distance between the learner and the faculty, that improves retention because it improves the relationship. And there is a really big one that in online doctoral learners, we have to give them better research skills. And that's very difficult to do in online programs. So if you took all of those needs, we collapsed them together, and we said it is not known how the use of Zoom for a coaching mechanism between doctoral learners and chairs leads the improvement of cognitive factors or psychological factors such as social isolation, social presence, research, self-efficacy, etc. So, and then we decided to do that as a case study. But that's taking threads of all different areas of research and putting them together. And that's where you tend to get your most creative, because nobody's done research looking at that topic. Okay. The next sheet I'm not going to go over. It's basically the same set of things, and you'll find when you look at this, when it sits on the website, that there are actually examples of each one of these sitting on this particular sheet that kind of illustrate the types of things that I've illustrated. As I mentioned, you can take a look at the 3 forms of replication studies on the Laird website to be able to justify and decide upon the different ones. We talk about recommended studies from prior studies and literature reviews. Most studies provide the recommendation, so it is one of the easiest ways to get them. However, that recommendation from a single study alone is not sufficient. And in fact, if you could take a couple of the methods of the 5 methods and use both of them, or 2 of them, or 3 of them, it becomes a better justification. You want a strong justification, especially if later on you want to publish your dissertation. So you have to identify the reasons for doing a study beyond just a single article or 2 articles. Because I get asked the question, what's the minimum number of articles? Well, the minimum number of articles is whatever you need to put together a really good argument for doing your study. Remember, it's also important that that literature review, the original one, is on a broad source, and that literature review has to span. It's a historical perspective from when the broad problem started to when you're taking a look at it. And it's through that synthesis of the different types of research and using 1 or 2 of the methods that I talked about that you're going to get your best set of arguments. Okay? Broadly researched topics which have had hundreds, if not thousands, of studies completed in them are an area that is pretty easy to take a look at, and many of them cut across psychology, education, and business. It includes all different types of designs. But besides looking at articles, because you all tend to go research articles, right? And hopefully you're all using Google Scholar in the library. How many of you use Google Scholar in the GCU library? Good. Because when you use Google Scholar in the GCU library, it links you to the articles, so you don't have to go find them. When you use Google Scholar in Google, you don't do it that way?
I did not.
Oh, for shame. It's an easier way to do it. It saves you a lot of time. And if you can't find the article, you ask the librarian to go get it. So looking at broad research areas with the best search engines that you can find is one way. But after you've done a few of those researches, go find the 3 to 5 journals where you find most of those articles and just start looking at those journals every month, or have those articles from those journals sent to you, because you'll find if you're doing gaming, there's only 2 or 3 journals that publish most of the articles. If you're doing leadership, there's maybe 3 to 5 leadership journals that you may want to take a look at. So it's much easier to take a look at it. Okay? I've covered that already. And I've covered these already in the examples that I gave you. So, questions at this point? Yes?
You did a good job of stimulating thought work and engagement, by the way. What area of hard science were you in?
I did a multidisciplinary degree across geophysics and Asian studies. So my undergraduate thesis was I had to translate alchemy experiments from Chinese, and I was fluent in Chinese at that time, and replicate those experiments to see how they tried to create gold and what they really got. And actually, I just got a new group of PhD students, and you know, they went and researched me. I didn't realize you guys ever do that. And I don't have my undergraduate thesis. So one of them is going to send it to me because they went and found it. I didn't realize that the university keeps them. So that's what. So I was geology, physics, chemistry, and then Asian studies. And I took all my Asian study courses at Harvard because you could take courses both ways.
How was chemistry?
Chemistry. Oh, chemistry.
So now that you kind of gave us an excellent big picture, where are you seeing the trends now in terms of what were the common mistakes when we get to that point?
What do I see as the what?
Back those,
Common mistakes.
The perspectives.
Oh, the common mistakes? Yeah, my learners in 881 asked me, I'm going to do the positive part of that. What are the things that you need to do to avoid the common mistakes? And they're as follows. Because I'm also an AQR reviewer. I do the AQR reviews for the 20 chairs that I coach. The number one mistake is the 10 strategic points aren't aligned. The problem statement doesn't come out of the needs. The research questions doesn't come out of the theoretical foundation models. And particularly on interviews, the interview questions don't give them the data they need to answer the problem statement. So that alignment is really important. And people say, well, I've done it, now I'm going to go do my prospectus. That's fine, but if things get out of alignment in your 10 points, the prospectus doesn't get approved. So that's number one. The second big area when you get into the prospectus is, for some reason you don't read the criteria. Or you choose to ignore them, which was often done when you were in classes, because a lot of professors didn't really hold you accountable for the rubric. But trust me, you will rewrite that prospectus and proposal until you do meet every criteria. So it's much better to do it the first time around. So I tell people, take the criteria and use them as the outline for your section. If you use them as the outline for the section, you will meet them. If you think you can meet any criteria there in 2 sentences, it's not very likely. So I also suggest to people, most criteria take 1 to 2 paragraphs in your prospectus and may take 1 to 4 paragraphs in your proposal. So meet the criteria, and I don't care if you think you met it. It's really important when I read it that I think you met it because it's clear. Which gets to the third big gap of why I reject the AQ proposals on the AQR review. You don't know how to write a paragraph. Now that may seem really silly because most of you know how to write a paragraph because you learned it in grade school, high school, college, all over again. But an academic paragraph is a little bit different. And it has a very few clear set of rules. It has to have a topic sentence. That topic sentence is your point that you are making, and therefore there should never be a citation in that topic sentence because it's your thought. You're then a doctoral learner, so you have to prove that topic sentence. And you do that with a series of arguments that are in the paragraph. But you can't pull arguments out of your head because you're not allowed to share any information out of your head in your dissertation. Everything has to come out of the literature. So that means your arguments should each be supported with a citation out of the literature. The next point is you have a topic sentence. That's the topic you discuss in the paragraph, not the other 3 that came to mind as you were writing the paragraph. That free-flowing writing that you did to write a great short story, it does not work for a dissertation. You have to go back to that logical, structured format of the paragraph. Paragraph can only be 3 to 8 sentences, and APA says it can never be, it has to always be under a page. And then it ends with a transition sentence, because that gets to another reason that the proposal gets rejected. The flow of your paragraphs It's not always logical. If you don't have a topic sentence, you don't have a transition sentence, and I'm reading a dissertation on some topic that I don't know anything about, I don't understand your transition. So it goes back to, if you want to get your prospectus reviewed in the fewest steps, make sure you write to the criteria, make sure when you're writing to the criteria it's clear, make sure you're always using very well structured paragraphs, and you can't bring in an editor. Occasionally I do a little consulting work, but not with our learners because we're not allowed to, on how to do a doctoral dissertation, and I serve as their coach. And I have a couple of friends still that are at Harvard, so I try not to do more than one student a year, but I charge between $8,000 and $10,000 for one dissertation to just coach them through the writing. Because if you think of coaching somebody through 200 to 300 pages of rewriting every paragraph, because every paragraph talks about 3 topics and there's no lot, that is a lot of work. It's not about editing. So don't say, well, I'll get an editor to do that, because there are very few editors can do that. And mostly editors edit sentence structure, and they edit for clarity, and they edit for APA format. They do not rewrite your stuff. So get it right the first time. That's why we give you the template and why we give you the guidelines. And the last thing people do, and is a really big issue, we used to have these 30-page prospectus. There is a guideline on the prospectus. It says, introduction, 1 paragraph. We mean 1 paragraph. In the topics for the review of literature, we say a short paragraph of 3 to 4 sentences for each of the 4 to 6 topics. We mean a short paragraph. And so now all the chairs are returning to the learners, because what happens is if you give us a 30, and we've even had 60-page prospectus, it takes 6 or 7 times as long to review it, and I guarantee you there's a lot more mistakes in 60 pages than there are in 6 pages. So you will probably, and we've had people revising it 10 times, and now we're saying we just want 6 to 10 pages when you take the tables out, preferably 6. And every one of those sections is 1 to 3 paragraphs. Most of them are only 1 paragraph. Only write the 1 paragraph. Do not, more is not better, less is better.
Are you supposed to have your citations in those paragraphs too?
Yes. And that brings up a good point, because that's the other thing people do. People will say, the best design for this study is a case study, Yin 2014. Did Yin ever tell that person that the best design for their study was a case study? No, you can't use a citation, cannot throw a citation at the end of your sentence to try to give it credibility. You can only use a citation if you're paraphrasing what they say. You can't use a paraphrase to say, well, this is what I thought they meant. And the AQR reviewers now will, on just about every learner, check at least 20 of those citations and go into those articles and look at them. And I recently did one learner, and I did 20 and couldn't find any of them. I have told that learner they now have to provide a page and the article for every citation in their proposal. Because if those 20 didn't relate to an article, I have to assume the other 300 that they have in the citations don't relate, and so I'm not going to look them up. So now they have to put a page number. And that learner admitted that they put a lot of stuff that they really did believe that you could make a citation. They weren't doing this purposely dishonestly. They really believed that you could use a citation for what you think they meant. Okay? And we see that all the time. Or people said, you know, these 4 people believe that the problem with this is this, or these 10 people. But if you go into those 10 articles, they didn't all identify the same problem. They were very different. But they thought if they put more citations around their problem, it was going to have more credibility. Okay? So when you use citations, you can only use the citation next to something that's a direct quote, and you can use a citation next to something if you are paraphrasing exactly what the author said, and you need to be able to point that out to the AQR reviewer in terms of where it was. So as you're writing your proposal and dissertation, I tell people for the first draft, even on paraphrase citations, leave your page number in, and then my learners take that out when they turn it in for AQR review. Then they remove the page numbers, but they have that recent version with the page numbers in it. So when they ask to find them, they already have the version that has them in it, and they don't have to spend a day or two trying to find out where they think they took it from. Other questions? That's a very long-winded answer to a very important question. So, thank you. Other questions?
There's one over there. Go ahead.
Hi, I have a question. So going back to the literature review, you were talking about kind of going back and covering approximately 10 years historical information on the topic.
Depending upon the topic, could be 10, it could be 60.
Now, if you have, say, you're studying elementary students and if they're academically improved by using gaming, do you have to also include historical information on the needs of these elementary students and leading up to why they could?
No, the focus of the historical, it would be the use of gaming to help elementary students. So when did the research on that area of using gaming to help improve elementary school start? And most likely that's most likely it's about 10 years.
So is that using the historical information to build the case or to give the historical progression? Is that going to throw our citation quota of 85 to 15 out of whack?
No, because that's not a lot of your citations. That's only that one section. So maybe you have a total of 10 or 12 articles. Now, there's a minimum of 50 articles, right? That's required. I think it's 50 empirical articles. Most dissertations have 100 plus. One of my recent PhD learners had 287. You have to have significant enough literature, and if you're doing a broader topic, 50 is very seldom the number that you need. I tell most learners to target having a minimum of 100, and 75 of those need to be from the 5 years when you publish your dissertation, not now. So when you're looking for your articles on all those broad topics in the review of literature, the theoretical foundation, the methodology, etc., when you do your Google Scholar search, look for 3 years. Because when you publish, that's going to be 5 years.
Your example earlier, you talked about emotional intelligence and engagement. So you have literature based on both of those threads. How do you bring that together?
Yeah. What you do is when you're writing your review of literature, that section in review of literature, first there's a background to the problem section in chapter 2. So you talk about and you build the background to the problem. Then there's a theoretical foundation section, which is where you talk about your theories and models that you're going to use and use them to develop your research questions. Then if you're doing, particularly if you're doing a quantitative study and you're using variables, in there you might do a context piece first, like the importance of improving performance in organizations or the importance of emotional intelligence in leaders. And then you get into your variables, so you'd have one section on emotional intelligence, talking about all the research that's been done broadly and looking at emotional intelligence, probably in leaders. Then you'd have another section that looks at all the different types of studies and how organizations improve organization engagement. And then you will do the next section, which is the relationship of emotional intelligence and engagement. And it may be a little bit broader, like the relationship of social and emotional intelligence and engagement and organization commitment. You want it broad enough that you can have a number of articles and say a lot of studies have said there's a relationship between these two. And in some cases there's not been a study looking at your two variables at all, and then you'll have to take similar variables and look at it. So you kind of build it. Here's the context. You may even put in a section on the population you're studying. I have a learner studying quality of work life and organization commitment in flight attendants in the United States. So she looked at organization commitment, organization satisfaction, and a whole bunch of things in that one section. And she also had a section on flight attendants and why organization commitment was important to retention. So you build the logic, and the best way to find many of these sections is to go look at related dissertations, right? Because other related dissertations had to put in these same types of sections. So when you took the literature review class, or when you take the literature review class, one of the methods that's shared is go find 5 or 10 dissertations and see what they covered in the review of literature topics, and go pull the topics out of that. Other questions? Okay.
You know how you go to residency and you're exhausted at the end of the night? Well, faculty members also. We have Dr. Maul and Dr. Shelton with us in the back corner, and they've been at residency all day. So Dr. Maul will come back in July. I think we should let her go now. But aren't you glad you came?
Thank you. And make your topic fun and valuable to your future career. Because it's not just to get your dissertation, it's a lot of work. So if you don't really want to study it, don't let a chair talk you into studying something you don't want to study. Put up a good argument from the literature so you can study exactly what you want to study. And thank you for being a great audience.